And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really happy you're taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about what VMware is doing to remove passwords. So my name is Brad Doctor, Senior Director for Information Security at VMware. I lead secure architecture and engineering. So our role is operational, protecting VMware. Obviously, we talk to customers quite a lot about what we're doing, but at the end of the day, our mission is to secure VMware itself and make sure we've got a great experience for everyone at VMware, secure experience as well. So agenda, so already done the introduction. We'll go over the vision for VMware and InfoSec as well. Case against passwords, why do we want to get rid of passwords, obviously, and how we've solved the issue at VMware, and what remaining challenges we've got. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. Right, so the VMware vision, quite simply, any device, any application, any cloud. We want to provide intrinsic security, same type of platform, same type of manager interface across the entire ecosystem. How about VMware IT? So the overview as of Q2 this year, you can see here we've got about 169 offices, 16 data centers, over 7,000 VMware ESXi hosts. Keep in mind a host is something that runs a bunch of VMs and or containers. About 1.1 million VMs created or destroyed every week. Interestingly, almost the same amount of containers also created or destroyed each week. Number of reasons for this, from production workloads to test labs to R&D, product development, and so on. 69 applications microsegmented for VMware NSX. This is now has been a mandatory requirement for all new application deployments within VMware for a number of years. It's gone over very well for intrinsic security. We've got 18 production applications running on the VMware Cloud and AWS. So these are production apps run by IT for VMware. So if you're a customer, this is our workloads operating our business, not necessarily powering our cloud services. Over 30 petabytes of vCN raw storage in our data centers across the world. More and more, we're using vCN encryption at the hypervisor level, and that's working out quite well too. And over 63,000 devices managed by Workspace ONE. Interestingly, the number of employees for VMware, 35,000 or so. This is just about right in terms of, I think it's like 2-point-something devices per person on average. So this reflects that. These numbers don't reflect the acquisitions, by the way, Pivotal and Carbon Black, but therefore, prior to that. And then 31 SD-WAN edges. VeloCloud obviously is our SD-WAN platform. And we've got 5 SD-WAN hubs. An SD-WAN hub is where traffic is aggregated and handled, and all the great things that SD-WAN does. And finally, we've got 11 NSX advanced load balancer deployments, AVI, and that sort of thing. So that's the VMware IT environment. So why do you want to get rid of passwords? I'm sure we've all used a password at least once today at some website, somehow, some fashion, maybe logging into your laptop or whatever. Quite simply, they are ubiquitous, but you get rid of passwords and you get higher user satisfaction. PCI requirements, other requirements require, forced complexity, regular changing of the password, all things that are quite painful and frankly don't add any security benefits at all. NIST, National Institute of Security Technology for the USA, was one of the first leaders here to say that, this doesn't make any sense. Based on the data, having long, complex passwords doesn't really help, and certainly resetting them on a regular basis doesn't help either. In fact, it makes things worse because people start writing them down, start doing things that no one really wants, right? Unintended consequences. Secondly, improve security. When you have no password, you have alternatives, of course, and they're much better than a password. Easier to use and more secure. We'll get into that a little bit later. Business resilience. So the whole COVID thing, took the world by storm. VMware is no exception. Prior to where we are today with COVID, VMware is pretty typically distributed in terms of who was in the office and who wasn't. I'm not sure what the percentages were, but they were average, right? In one weekend, we went from that to 97% plus of the workforce being remote in one weekend. The issues we had, the hiccups we had, were more for the people who had never worked from home and just weren't set up for it. R&D developers, primarily. And their biggest issue basically was getting their hardware out, to their house, right, to the residents. The second issue they had was getting soft tokens deployed. All that stuff was self-service, and so they're able to do it on their own once they knew what to do, and they're productive and operational with nearly no hiccup. Pat, our CEO, Pat Gelsinger, in our latest earnings call, even said VMware had the most productive quarter for software delivery in the history of the company. all while all this stuff was happening. So that's real testament to what VMware IT had built and enabled the company to do with no passwords, because it's a whole ecosystem of things that go into this. So where did we come from? Like every company, right? We started somewhere, and we started at a pretty typical place. We use passwords, things that we could forget, get compromised, right? So Active Directory passwords, very, very typical, very old school, if you will. We had hard tokens. Hard tokens was the default for a company of our size. And I'm sure you can imagine the logistical challenges of shipping a hard token around the world, not to mention the life cycle and the expire and all that good stuff, right? It's very, very painful. And all authentication decisions were based on that one moment in time. If you had the right passcode or the right password, you were in, no questions asked. Again, very typical legacy environment. But where do we get to? Say we have no untrusted password use. This is a key clarification, untrusted. We do not allow password to be any factor, any sort, in the story when you're off of the network. When you're on the network, we still have cases, like every company will, command line interface, legacy systems, things like that that are protected, isolated inside of a data center, administrative use only, right? We do still have those. And so there are still password use, and is still password use in those cases, very limited. But for the end user, right, where the risk is, basically the bulk of the risk, we've got certificates to validate the device, but also be used for authentication. So the preferred method of authentication for our devices, whether it's mobile or laptop, or any device really, is that certificate. So if it's a managed device, the certificate is the first factor and preferred factor. That falls through to an MFA token, no problem, but it's one of the two. And finally, or third here is push authentication. Push authentication is out of band. So when you log in a Workspace ONE or some other site, for instance, and you've got an app installed on the phone, much like Google and Apple do, it'll contact that other device that's already been enrolled and say, hey, is this you? Right? Here's what's happening. Yes, it's me, or no, it's not. And so push authentication is where we're going next with the corporate level authentication. And then biometric and location-based decisions. We support and embrace Windows Hello, Touch ID, Face ID, all that stuff. We want that because, again, we don't even want you to have to use a password on your local device to log in locally, right? We want to even get rid of those. And then location-based decisions. A little bit of an old school kind of a SIM terminology here, right? Where you can't log in multiple places in one point, too far away, yada, yada. But it is kind of interesting if you see location or login attempts from a strange location in the middle of the night in a place other than where the employee normally would be. That's actually kind of helpful in terms of maybe credential theft or things like that. So it's still relevant to a degree, at least. So where do we get? I think most people in VMware would agree more productivity as well as increased security. The ability to scale, as I mentioned earlier, the whole COVID thing, forcing us to go remote like that. And then improved automation. One of the key metrics we track in conjunction with our IT support organization, or OASIS as we call it, are the number of tickets caused by any form of authentication, whether it's a ticket, or I'm sorry, a token, certificate, whatever it is. We want to work with OASIS and keep those numbers down as far as possible. Interestingly, the bulk of the tickets at this point are people who've forgotten their password. We do unfortunately still require password rotation every 180 days. It's a PCI thing we've not yet overcome. And we use our passwords so little, when that time comes, people have forgotten what the password is, and they don't even know where to go to reset the password. So it's an unintended consequence, but one that's, I guess, kind of a good unintended consequence. So nitty gritty, right? What did we actually do to make this happen? So again, the key is user experience. Talked about managed endpoints, unmanaged endpoints. And again, the VMware vision, any device, any application, right? So the managed experience is one that we want people to desire, to actually say that this is a good experience. So for the fully managed experience, gets the full security stack, carbon black on the endpoint, managed pre-configured apps. When you get a new laptop, Workspace ONE will pull down all the applications that are meant for corporate use. So Office 365 and whatever other applications based on your role. They're pre-configured, so it's licensed, it's logged in, it's ready to go. Certificates and push authentication also push down. When you go to log into Workspace ONE or any application that supports modern authentication, such as Office applications, the certificate will be the primary and preferred factor for authentication. User experience there is fantastic. The security of that is also fantastic because the security, the certificate may be able to be intercepted potentially, but it certainly cannot be reused, cannot be replayed. A cryptographically very secure solution. What we learned, we arrived here by evolution, by the way. What we learned by MFA, by the typical pin and token, is that they can be intercepted. And when you look at your phone and you go browse any website, you'll notice that the URI bar, the address bar, disappears. So let's say maybe someone clones a very popular site that employees log into, and let's say somehow a phishing email gets through to a select group of people. They now click on that on their phone. They're asked to log in. They provide their username and their PIN code, right, and or site token code. Well, guess what? Someone's watching, right? It's never actually used by the system except as someone watching intercepts and then uses it on your behalf, and then goes about their business, which is, of course, not such a good thing for you. So that's when we realized that this whole PIN and token code was flawed and had to go away, right? At least as a primary factor, it had to go away because it is effectively a one-time password. Now, being VMware, we do have an unmanaged experience. This is an executive sponsored, mandated, kind of thing. We do want to enable choice for our people, and there are a number of reasons why this makes sense. But the unmanaged experience does enable our employees to be, or our colleagues to be productive, but kind of at arm's reach, I guess you could say, right? There is a network abstraction. It is multi-factor authentication. It is the token basically. It's functional, but not a great experience. You can connect to Workspace ONE. You can get into applications. You've got to re-sign in on a regular basis and that sort of thing. It enables base functionality. So that's what we've done. Now, if you want to come through here, right, what is required to make this happen? And it's important to note, this is not something that VMware built in a quarter or even a year. This is something we've been working on continually to this day since I think around 2015, 2016, roughly. We made progress the way we did, firstly with executive commitment across the board. We wanted to first provide sort of the reference for VMware technologies, what's possible. Second, we had to get the executive alignment, commitment to apply resources to actually make it happen. Because it's one thing to say we're going to do it, it's entirely another to apply those resources to make it happen. And the tenacity of it, what we mean by the tenacity is it's not easy. When you look at our Workspace ONE app catalog, there are a few hundred applications. Every one of those applications had to be configured individually and onboarded into Workspace ONE. They all have their own little wrinkles and kinks, as you might expect. That tenacity is critically important because the more apps you have in the catalog, the more relevant it becomes to the population of colleagues, right? But it's difficult. It's not easy. It requires deep technical expertise to say, well, actually, we can onboard this Lexi application, and here's how we could do it, right? No, actually, we can make it happen, and this is how we can do it. We have, like many teams, I'm sure, have experienced the pushback of saying, no, we can't do that, right? We don't have time, we don't know how to do it, we can't do it. So tenacity is critically important for a program such as this to make it successful, especially over time. Useful tools. You think about what we've done, what some of the most critical building blocks that went into that were actually provisioning, IDP, right? Identity provisioning platform. In our case, it was a proprietary platform that we were able to customize and work with a vendor on to meet our needs. And at this point, this is the platform for onboarding and offboarding all VMware colleagues, and also provisioning access into the applications that have already been onboarded. And then finally, innovation. Like you mentioned earlier, the tenacity innovation, right? It's kind of it's a virtual circle there. You've got to be able to innovate and find a solution to every problem because there are solutions. And legacy applications stick around for a good reason, right? There's no question, but there are ways to address those as well and get them onboarded into your IDP. In the IDP, it could be SailPoint, Savient, Ping, Okta, whomever. It doesn't really matter. You'll have the same capability to make this work. Right. So where would you start? As I mentioned earlier, identity management, right? The key part here is basically going to be the pivot point for your entire IAM program. This is critical. The technology you implement is critically important. In our case, we were really looking for a cloud native type of technology, someone who really understood the cloud well and worked natively with the cloud. But then the process you build on top of that is just as important as the technology. We've got an entire team within InfoSec that works across the company, onboarding applications and managing the whole life cycle of that. And then the people. Accountability here is important, right? RACI chart, I'm not a big fan of them, but it's at least very helpful in an enterprise to understand who's doing what. But the people in the program are very important. While automation will save the day and enable that program to be most successful, you got to have relationships across the company. You've got to have the right know-how, the technical knowledge, the right diplomacy to make all this work. And then the most value for end users. This is where VMware really focused early on. What do people use the most? Okay, these are the first things that we're going to focus on and enable first. Interestingly, when we started, Microsoft was not one of the providers that supported modern authentication. So that was actually a bit of a laggard, and it was somewhat painful, as you might expect. But the moment they supported modern authentication, floodgates opened for the entire industry, us included. And the user experience for that just went through the roof. It's very, very good. And make sure that obviously benefit for the users. That's pretty obvious. But this is one where you really need to be surveying the population to make sure, hey, is this working as well as we think it is? What is not working? What do you want? Right? What should we do to make your experience even better? And then the automation. This should be self-service. Help desk calls should be an indication of something that's not working, right? As I mentioned earlier, the passwords, that's a side effect that's very difficult for us to solve at this point, but it's a side effect that we would not have predicted. So that's kind of a good side effect, I guess you could say. But that self-service, that automation is critically important. And finally, probably the most important thing here is that no, the password is actually not okay. We can't revert to a password, not even for a little bit, maybe a week, maybe a day. No, it's not a factor that is acceptable. And I have to tell you, this is based on experience. There were stats long ago, I'll date myself, but long ago, right? The time you put a host on the internet directly to the point where it was compromised. And this is, way back, right? But the same is true today for passwords, right? The moment you have any property on the internet that accepts a password as a form of authentication, the attacks start. Whether it's a spray attack or a dictionary attack, or whatever, you can set your stopwatch and you can start making, you can have a betting pool on how quickly it's going to happen because they're being scanned at all times. Right, so get a program in place, right? What are some of the remaining issues? The things that we deal with on a regular basis, right? Our IAM program at VMware, like I said earlier, the legacy applications, there are a lot of them within the company, and they're not going away. And we're continually working through getting new ones onboarded, getting existing ones, tweaked for a new revision, whatever, things happen, things break, what have you. But that's very key for us. Technical complexity, as I mentioned before as well, you've got to have that strong technical team with a high degree of diplomacy that's able to work across the company and solve problems as a partnership with other teams. The moment you put it on another team to solve by themselves and come back to you, you've lost that conversation. It's not going to happen. You've got to work as a partner with all teams to get them onboarded into your program. And then compliance. This is an interesting one. Thinking about compliance, a number of different scenarios come up. In the case of IAM, mostly it's around passwords. Surprise, surprise. But the compliance rules as they stand today are rooted in the past, right? Forced complexity, very short change windows, it's terrible. And so what we've done is we've produced evidence that shows the comprehensive nature of our program and why it's okay for us to have a 180-day window for passwords and why we're moving toward perpetual risk-based password resets. What we really want to get to is everyone has a password that's 256 characters long and no one knows what it is because they never use it, right? It's just it's a mandatory object with an active directory. But this is an issue that you will need to expect to solve with your auditors because they're going to ask you the question like, well, if you're not using a password, what are you using? This doesn't make any sense. I've not seen this before. It's at least our experience, right, early on. And so be prepared to educate and help your auditors, your QSAs, be better and bring them into the presence as well. Right, so you're there, right? Like VMware, right? You think you've got it complete. This is where vigilance and a whole comprehensive program really comes into play. You've got to always be looking because there are always laggards, right? Give an example, ActiveSync. ActiveSync is the protocol used by mobile devices to get email from Microsoft, whether it's Exchange or 365, pretty much the same thing, fundamentally. ActiveSync itself supports both legacy authentication, which is password only, as well as modern authentication, which is very good. The issue with older tenants such as VMware, we've been a customer for quite a long time, is that our tenant supports both by default. This is very important because an end user, even if they're managed with Workspace ONE, could set up a new email account with their password and it works because the platform itself allows that. Or they could set it up and use modern auth. That would work too. It really depends on the device and the default authentication path in the device. Older versions of iOS would let you use a password, same with Android. And so you've got to be very, very vigilant here and understand your platform to a high degree, which is difficult, admittedly, but know that you may have passwords lagging, right? You may have stragglers out there available. So the key to that is to be scanning at all times, whether you're doing it or another company is doing it, one way or another. Find your open properties that accept a password and get rid of them as quickly as possible. In addition to that, in your SOC, always be monitoring for all authentication events. Know what type of authentication event should be happening, right? We should see authentication events from Workspace ONE. We should not see authentication events directly from Office itself, right? As an example. So know your platform, your state, and understand what type of authentication should happen, and do everything, treat it as a P0 or hair on fire event anytime you see an authentication event that is not normal, right? Someone using a password. So as I mentioned that, IMAP and POP3, this is a great example of one where they're still in use by a number of companies, a number of different use cases for these protocols. Their legacy, they don't support modern authentication. Well, G Suite makes it work through sort of an OAuth kind of scheme. It's still ultimately single factor, but at least it's effectively application password. Microsoft still isn't there yet, right? A lot of the corporate world obviously is running on top of Microsoft, and so it's still very much an issue. This is an issue for VMware that we've managed to contain, not solve. We've contained it by limiting the users who can use it and from where they are able to use it. So this is a perfect example of something that is in broad use that can't go away yet and is really not getting better anytime soon either, unfortunately. Vigilance, like you mentioned, right? Always be watching, right? Scan the environment, as I mentioned, monitor your logs, as I mentioned, and create a bounty program as well. Within VMware, we've got a Slack channel called MFA Anywhere, or MFA underscore Anywhere. And this is where we invite people in to talk about MFA, vent whatever they need to do, but also give us feedback and say, hey, did you know about this, right? I found this today as I was doing my thing for VMware, and it asked me for a password. Hey, thanks for reporting that. Right, here's some spec. and that sort of approach to making this a community problem, or not problem, a community opportunity, community partnership is critically important, because we don't have all the eyes and ears, right? We're scanning, we're monitoring, but hey, no one's perfect. And so, involving your colleagues as business partners is critically important here. All right, so we are at the end and ready for some questions. Sakura?
Excuse me, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A. I see a question there, Brad. You can, let me know if you're able to see it.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll just read the question off. So our organization uses Okta, and they're releasing a product called FastPass in Q4. How does this compare to your solution? Honestly, Javier, I don't know. As mentioned earlier, I'm not in product. I'm in IT for VMware. I only know our product, to be honest. Okta has a very good reputation, and I'm sure whatever they release is going to be good as well. I would say that as long as they support regular standards such as SAML, right, Security Authentication Markup Language, OAuth, and that sort of thing, you should be able to work across your landscape. You should have no issues with that. Any other questions? Maybe Scroll, ask you a question. What's been your experience with authentication systems we've got at VMware?
I actually love the idea with the face recognition. I never have to worry about entering a password. I basically just have and make sure that my camera is on and look into it, and within a second, I'm logged in.
Yep. Yeah, that's something actually I didn't really mention is we do very much embrace Windows Hello, obviously for Windows devices, Touch ID, Face ID for iOS as well, and even the Android equivalents very much embrace those, because they're, again, much better than a PIN, much better than a password, obviously, and very secure as well. In fact, I had a conversation this morning on this topic where we started with the hypothesis that let's disconnect endpoints from Active Directory, right? No VMware endpoint is joined to the domain by default, really for any reason. We did that for a number of reasons, right? Frankly, trust of Active Directory is the biggest one. But the hypothesis was that even if you're entering just a local password to your device, if it's managed, it's going to be encrypted. If you lose that device for any reason, whether it's personal managed or corporate and managed, we're going to hear about it very quickly. And if it's managed, it's encrypted. And a lost device becomes a data loss, or I'm sorry, an asset loss issue, right? Just it's not that big of a deal, frankly. If it's not encrypted, now it's a whole other bag of hurt. It becomes a data issue, information loss issue, and that's a very, very painful problem for us. So the hypothesis was quite simply, we can have local authentication because the device is going to be in possession of the person. The moment it goes out of the possession of the person, they're going to report it, we're going to wipe it, and we're going to mitigate the risk. And the end user experience is going to be better for it. Instead of having to type their Active Directory password, you can imagine, right, how painful that would be. They're going to Face ID, they're going to Touch ID, they're going to Windows Hello, Face ID, and all the aspects of Windows Hello into it. And it's their device in their possession. So it becomes something they are via touch or biometrics, right? And something they have, the device itself. And that over the years has proven to be true. We've got the data to support that has actually been true. I see one other question here from Javi. Do we need the agent installed on all devices for the passwordless solution? It needs to be managed. However, you can have the unmanaged experience, as I mentioned earlier, and have a soft token on your phone, even a hard token if you're a legacy VMware employee, maybe you got one of those, and still have that MFA experience. It becomes essentially an OTP experience, right? One-time password, but it is MFA. And as I mentioned earlier too, I think I mentioned FIDO tokens, fast latency online, something that VMware very much embraces and supports. We part of the board of directors for FIDO, and very much supportive of that. That's something that's being rolled out as well. So that's going to allow BYOT, bring your own token. We've actually deployed a few thousand tokens internally already that are VMware branded. Great experience, right? No issues. The issue I have with it, frankly, being mobile, very mobile at this point, is the physical token itself. I personally prefer a certificate or a soft token, but the hard token certainly has its place. And the Slack channel, Javi, is MFA anywhere. You can just search for MFA in our Slack channel, and you'll see it. Any other questions? All right. Okay, well, I think we can start wrapping it up here. So just a little bit of information on the VMware and VMware program. VMware and VMware is meant to showcase our products as we use them at VMware. We track things like at the CIO level, we track usage of our own products on a quarterly basis or monthly basis even. And so you can always get the latest information about how we're using it. You can see our blog link there, the corporate description at the vmware.com address. You can also reach us on Twitter, VMWonVMW. Yeah. And yeah, with that, I think we'll wrap this up. So thank you very much again, everyone, for joining us. I hope that was a good use of your time. The session was recorded, and we'll be sending it out to all participants when we're finished. And so feel free to distribute that and reach out as well. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can reach out internally, whatever. Happy to answer any questions and follow up as needed.